Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born into the Todoroki family. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the Todoroki family dojo was a paradox, a battlefield of opposing forces. On one side of the vast, tatami-matted space, the wooden walls were laced with a delicate, crystalline frost that glittered under the harsh overhead lights. On the other, the air shimmered with a heat so intense it warped the view of the polished shoji screens. At the epicenter of this elemental war stood a boy of 10, his small frame a crucible containing a power too vast for his body. This was Todoroki Akira. His hair, a stark, defiant white like his mother's, was plastered to his forehead with a mixture of sweat and melting frost. His eyes, the same piercing turquoise as his father's, were squeezed shut in concentration. His left arm was extended, palm out, from which a steady, silent stream of cold radiated, feeding the ice that crept up the walls. His right leg was braced, wreathed in flickering, silent orange flames that kept the floor beneath him from freezing over. He was holding the balance. This was the exercise. Focus, Akira! A voice boomed from the edge of the room, a sound like grinding stone and burning coal. Your output is wavering. The temperature differential is dropping. Do you want to fail? Akira flinched, his concentration shattering for a microsecond. The flames around his legs sputtered, and a sharp, biting cold shot up his spine from his left arm. He gasped, a plume of icy fog escaping his lips. His skin, already a patchwork of faint red blotches and pale, chilled sections, prickled with a fresh wave of agony. It was the unique, horrifying sensation of being burned and frostbitten at the exact same time. Do not let the pain distract you, Endeavor commanded. He stood with his arms crossed, his own volcanic visage illuminated by the glow of his signature fiery beard and mustache. He was not a father watching his son. He was a master smith observing his finest blade in the forge, scrutinizing it for the slightest imperfection. The pain is a tool. It tells you where your body is weak. You will overcome that weakness. You will temper this vessel until it can contain the power it was granted. Again, Akira bit his lip, tasting blood. He forced his thoughts back into line, his mind a frantic mess of analysis, a trait he couldn't suppress. Left arm angle is off by 2 degrees, causing inefficient energy transfer. Core temperature dropping too rapidly. Need to increase thermal output from my torso to compensate, but that will divert energy from the flame anchor on my right leg. The strain, my joints ache. It feels like the marrow in my bones is freezing. He was a prodigy born of a madman's dream. While his twin brother, Shoto, had inherited their parents' quirks in a perfect, tidy split, ice on the right, fire on the left, Akira's had been a true fusion. They called it thermoregulation. He could generate and project intense heat and cold from any part of his body, simultaneously if needed. On paper, it was perfect. The ultimate quirk, a seamless blend of power. Endeavor had wept with triumph the day it had manifested. But the vessel, as his father called it, was flawed. His body wasn't naturally immune to the extremes he could produce. Overuse on one end led to severe burns, on the other deep, cellular frostbite. Using both at once, like this, was a delicate, agonizing tightrope walk that shredded his system from the inside out. And Endeavor believed the only cure was to shred it more. To break it down and rebuild it, stronger, tougher, until it could withstand the crucible of his ambition. Hold it for 10 more seconds. Endeavor's voice cut through his haze of pain. Show me your resolve. 10. 9. 8. Akira's vision was starting to swim. Black spots danced at the edges. The frost on the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent cold. 7. 6. A tremor started in his extended arm, a violent shudder he couldn't control. The pain was no longer a sharp prickle but a deep, grinding ache, as if his bones were being crushed in a frozen vice. 5. 4. He could smell his own skin cooking where the heat was most concentrated, a sickeningly sweet odor of ozone and scorched flesh. 3. He heard a soft gasp from the doorway. He didn't need to look. He knew who it was. 2. His father's gaze intensified, a physical weight pressing down on him. Disappointment. He could feel it radiating off the man, hotter than any flame Akira could produce. 1. The dam broke. The power overloading his system erupted. The ice on the walls exploded outward in a shower of sharp crystals, and the flames around his legs surged into a roaring inferno that licked at the ceiling. For a moment, he was a miniature sun and a miniature blizzard combined. Then, just as quickly it was over, Akira collapsed onto the mats, his body twitching uncontrollably. He landed on his left side, and a scream tore from his throat as the still frozen flesh of his arm made contact with the floor. It felt like being stabbed with 1,000 glass needles. He curled into a ball, steam rising from his overheated right side while his left trembled with a chill that went soul deep. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Endeavor stood over him, a monolithic shadow blocking the light. Akira squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable criticism. Pathetic, Endeavor rumbled. You lost control. A true hero never loses control. Your body is still too weak. We will double the duration tomorrow. There was no comfort. No hand on his shoulder. No, are you all right? Just a clinical assessment of failure and a promise of more suffering. Akira didn't respond. He couldn't. He focused on breathing, on trying to reclaim ownership of a body that felt alien and broken. He heard his father's heavy footsteps retreat, the shoji screen sliding shut with a definitive thud that echoed the closing of a tomb. He was alone. Or he was supposed to be. A few moments passed, measured by the frantic beat of his own heart. Then, he heard them. Soft, hesitant footsteps on the tatame. A small shadow fell over him, one that didn't carry the oppressive weight of their father. Akira? He slowly uncurled, pushing himself into a sitting position with his trembling right arm. His left arm was useless, a dead weight of burning cold. He looked up into a face that was a mirror of his own, but different in 1,000 subtle ways. Shoto's expression was a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, but his mismatched gray and turquoise eyes held a storm of emotions Akira knew all too well: fear, pity, and a quiet, simmering anger that was always directed at their father. Shoto knelt, placing a sophisticated first aid kit on the floor beside him. It was a ritual they had perfected over the years, a silent treaty in their cold war of a childhood. Shoto was the medic. Akira was the casualty. Don't, Akira rasped, his voice hoarse. He'll be angry if he sees you. He's gone to his office, Shoto said, his voice a low monotone. He opened the kit, his movements precise. He pulled out a specialized burn cream and a fast-acting thermal blanket. He never asked if Akira was okay. He could see that he wasn't. The question was an insult to them both. Akira watched as his twin brother worked. Shoto's hands were steady as he gently took Akira's right hand, examining the angry red skin on his knuckles. He was always so careful, his touch a stark contrast to the brutal force of their father's training. As Shoto applied the cooling ointment, Akira finally allowed the tears he'd been holding back to well in his eyes. They weren't tears of pain, but of shame. Shame for his weakness, shame for needing this, for forcing this role onto his brother, Shoto, the failure. The one whose quirk was a simple, imperfect split. The one Endeavor had cast aside the moment Akira's perfect fusion had manifested. Shoto, who was spared the dojo, but was condemned to watch from the sidelines, a ghost in his own home. Sometimes, Akira wasn't sure who had it worse. I almost had it, Akira mumbled, the words tumbling out in the analytical, self-deprecating way he always spoke when he was exhausted. The energy flow was stable for 47 seconds. A new record. But the feedback loop, it's exponential. The more I try to regulate, the more unstable the core differential becomes. It's a design flaw. My design. Shoto didn't reply. He finished with the burns and then carefully wrapped the thermal blanket around Akira's left side, tucking it in gently. The high-tech fabric began to hum, emitting a low-level warmth that fought back against the deep, cellular chill. The relief was instantaneous and overwhelming. Akira let out a shuddering sigh. You shouldn't have to do this, Akira whispered, looking at the floor. For the first time, Shoto paused. He looked at his twin, his mask cracking for just a second. And you shouldn't have to endure it, he said, his voice barely audible. The anger was there, a flicker of heat in his cool tone, It's not a design flaw, Akira. It's him. Akira flinched as if struck. To voice such a thought was treason. Their entire existence was predicated on the belief that Endeavor was right, that his methods were necessary. To question that was to render all of Akira's suffering meaningless. He's making me stronger, Akira recited, the words tasting like ash. To surpass All Might. It's my purpose. Shoto's jaw tightened. He said nothing else, simply packed up the kit. He helped Akira to his feet, letting his brother lean heavily on him. The walk back to the main house was a slow, painful shuffle. The traditional wooden halls of the estate felt vast and empty, the air thick with unspoken things. They passed Fuyumi, their older sister, who was pretending to arrange some flowers in a vase. She gave them a pained, worried smile that didn't reach her eyes, and quickly looked away. No one spoke of the dojo. It was the monster in the house that everyone pretended not to see. They reached Akira's room, and Shoto helped him onto his bed. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Thank you, Akira said, the words feeling small and inadequate. Shoto just nodded, his gaze distant. Try to rest, he said, before turning and leaving, closing the door softly behind him. Left alone, Akira stared at the ceiling. The pain was receding into a dull, throbbing map of his own failure. He hated this. He hated the weakness, the pain, the look in Shoto's eyes. He hated the pity from Fuyumi, and the forced ignorance of Natsuo. But most of all, he hated the part of himself that yearned for it all to stop. That part was the real enemy. That was the weakness his father was trying to burn and freeze out of him. His gaze drifted to the wall opposite his bed. It was covered in posters, figures, and newspaper clippings of one man, All Might. The symbol of peace smiled down at him, his signature V for victory pose a beacon of triumphant power. But Akira didn't see a savior. He didn't feel the rush of inspiration that so many others did. When he looked at All Might, he saw a mountain. A peak he was commanded to scale, no matter the cost. His eyes traced the hero's impossible physique, the unwavering confidence in his smile. He began to mumble, his analytical mind taking over once more. Immense physical strength, likely a simple enhancement-type quirk, but the scale is unprecedented. Note the posture, shoulders back, chest out. It's a projection of invulnerability. Is it a psychological tactic to demoralize villains, or a natural result of his power? The smile never falters, even during high-intensity combat. This suggests either an unbreakable will, or a conscious effort to maintain his image as a symbol. That's a potential vulnerability. An emotional attack could bypass the physical defenses if you can crack the facade. His analysis trailed off. He closed his eyes, the memory of a warmer time floating to the surface of his thoughts, an unwelcome oasis in his desert of a childhood. The memory was 5 years old, bright and sunny. He was 5. The dojo wasn't a torture chamber yet, it was just a big, empty room to play in. He and Shoto were chasing each other across the tatami mats, their laughter echoing in the cavernous space. Fuyumi was trying to teach them a simple kata, but they were too giggly to pay attention. Natsuo was making fun of their stances from the doorway. Their mother, Rei, was sitting on the engawa, the veranda overlooking the garden, a gentle smile on her face. Her presence was a soft, cooling balm. She called out to them, her voice full of light. Boys, be careful! You'll tire yourselves out before lunch. Even their father was different. He wasn't Endeavor yet, not really. He was just Enji Todoroki, the number 2 hero, a man with a fearsome reputation but who, in the quiet moments at home, could almost pass for a father. He was watching them from the other side of the veranda, his arms crossed. There was no fire in his eyes, just a stern, calculating watchfulness. He was assessing them, yes, but it lacked the obsessive malice that would come later. Shoto, your form is sloppy. He'd grunted, but there was no real heat in it. Akira, you're too reckless. Akira, emboldened by the playful atmosphere, had stuck his tongue out at his father. Shoto, ever the more reserved twin, had hidden a small smile behind his hand. Then it happened. Natsuo, in a fit of big brotherly teasing, had lobbed a small rubber ball at Akira's head. Acting on pure instinct, Akira threw up his hands to block it. From his right hand, a small, harmless puff of warm air escaped. From his left, a single, perfect snowflake materialized and fell to the mat, glistening for a second before melting. Everyone froze. The laughter died. Shoto stared, his eyes wide. He manifested his quirk a few months prior, a sputtering flame from his left side during a tantrum, and a patch of frost on his right when he tripped and fallen. A clean, simple split. But this was different. Akira stared at his own hands, confused. He tried it again, concentrating. He focused on the memory of the hot bath last night, and a small, controlled flame, no bigger than a candle's, flickered to life in his right palm. He then thought of the ice pops his mother sometimes gave them, and a thin sheen of frost coated his left. He could do both. On command. NG. Ray had whispered, a tremor of fear in her voice. She had seen the look on her husband's face. Akira looked up at his father. The stern watchfulness was gone. In its place was something new, something terrifying. It was a look of raw, unadulterated hunger. His turquoise eyes were wide, blazing with an intensity that had nothing to do with his quirk. He strode forward, kneeling in front of Akira, ignoring everyone else in the room. He gently took Akira's small hands in his own massive ones. Try again. Enji commanded, his voice a low, reverent whisper. Both. At the same time, scared but obedient, Akira concentrated with all his might. He thought of hot and cold, of fire and ice. A tiny flame ignited on his right index finger, while a delicate filigree of ice crystallized on his left. He held them both steady, looking up at his father for approval. Endeavor didn't smile. His expression was far more rapturous than that. It was the face of a zealot who had just witnessed a miracle. He looked from Akira's hands to his face, then over at Shoto, who had shrunk back towards their mother. The dismissal in that one glance was absolute. Shoto, the first attempt, the flawed draft, was now obsolete. Perfect, Endeavor breathed. A true fusion. Better than mine. Better than hers. It's perfect. That was the day his childhood ended. That was the day Todoroki Akira died and Endeavor's masterpiece was born. A sharp knock on his bedroom door jolted Akira from the memory. He sat up, his body protesting with a chorus of aches. Enter. The door slid open to reveal Endeavor. He had changed out of his hero costume and into a simple yukata, but he seemed no less imposing. He filled the doorway, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the all-might merchandise with a familiar look of contempt before settling on Akira. Your wounds are superficial, he stated. It wasn't a question. Recovery Girl could heal them in an instant, but you will not rely on such crutches. You will learn to manage the pain. You will let your body heal naturally. It will make you stronger. Yes, father, Akira said, his voice flat. Endeavor walked over to the wall, his massive form eclipsing the posters of the symbol of peace. He stared at All Might's smiling face for a long moment. Do you know why he is number 1, and I am number 2? Endeavor asked, his voice a low growl. Because he is stronger, Akira answered automatically. It was the catechism of his life. Wrong, Endeavor snapped, turning to face him. He is number 1 because he is a symbol. A carefully constructed lie. He sells hope to the masses, a commodity that breeds weakness. He smiles and laughs while the world burns. True strength is not about smiles. It's about results. It's about absolute, undeniable power that crushes evil without hesitation. He gestured around the room. This adulation you have for him is childish. He is not your hero. He is your target. He is the final obstacle between our bloodline and its rightful place. You were created for this purpose, Akira. Your quirk is the key. He took a step closer, his shadow falling completely over Akira on the bed. The UA entrance exam is in 5 years. That is your deadline. You will not just pass. You will crush it. You will score higher than anyone in the history of that school. You will enter UA not as a student, but as a statement. You will show them all what true power looks like. You will make them forget All Might's name. His father's words were a suffocating weight. This was his pep talk, his version of paternal guidance. It was a mission briefing. Akira was not his son, he was his weapon, and he was being aimed. Shoto will also take the exam, Endeavor continued, a dismissive wave of his hand. It is required. But he is an afterthought. A spare. His only use is to provide a baseline against which your own superiority can be measured. Do not concern yourself with him. The casual cruelty of the statement made Akira's stomach clench. He thought of Shoto's quiet, steady hands tending to his wounds just an hour ago. An afterthought? A spare. I understand, Akira said, forcing the words out. His throat felt tight. Good. Endeavor seemed satisfied. He gave Akira one last look, a master inspecting his tool before putting it away. The new training regimen begins at 0500 tomorrow. Do not be late. He turned and left, the room suddenly feeling larger and colder in his absence. Akira sat there for a long time, the silence ringing in his ears. He looked at his hands, the right, faintly red and sore from the heat. The left, pale and aching with a phantom chill. This was his gift. His curse. His destiny. Slowly, he slid off the bed and walked over to his desk. Pinned above it was a detailed chart of All Might's known battles, with notes and analyses scrawled in Akira's neat, compact handwriting. Silver Age debut versus Toxic Chainsaw. Note the lack of collateral damage despite the villain's destructive capacity. Conclusion: All Might possesses incredible fine control, not just raw power. How? He picked up a pen. His hand was still trembling slightly, but his resolve was hardening, calcifying into something cold and sharp. His father was wrong about one thing. This wasn't childish adulation. It was research. It was the obsessive study of an opponent. His eyes found the largest poster, the one directly in his line of sight from his bed. All Might, fists raised to the sky, that radiant, indomitable smile on his face. It was the smile of a man who carried the weight of the world and called it a privilege. For a moment, a flicker of a 5-year-old boy's awe sparked within him. A genuine, pure admiration for the greatest hero. Then, the memory of the dojo, of the searing pain and the bone-deep cold, washed over him. He thought of his father's burning eyes, of Shoto's silent anger, of his mother's distant, haunted expression. The spark of admiration was extinguished, smothered by the cold, hard reality of his purpose. He was not meant to admire that smile. He was meant to erase it. He looked at the hero, the symbol, the mountain. He saw his future. He saw his destiny. He saw the man he was born to destroy. With a grim determination that felt far too old for a 10-year-old boy, Akira Todoroki looked at the smiling face of the number one hero and made a quiet, solemn vow. I will surpass you. The 5 years that separated the 10-year-old boy in the dojo from the 15-year-old standing before the gates of Ue High had been carved from ice and forged in fire. For Todoroki Akira, they had been a relentless, agonizing climb. For Todoroki Shoto, they had been a lesson in the art of becoming invisible. The morning of the UA entrance exam began not with excitement, but with a frigid, oppressive silence. The breakfast table in the traditional Todoroki estate was a study in tension. Fuyumi moved with a practiced, nervous energy, placing plates of rice and miso soup down with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Natsuo stared into his bowl, his shoulders hunched, radiating a sullen resentment that had become his permanent shield. Their mother, Rei, was not present. She hadn't been for 3 years, not since the incident that no one spoke of, which had culminated in her being sent to a hospital far from the searing heat of her husband and the perfect, terrifying son he was creating. Her absence was a ghost at the table, a cold spot that no quirk could warm. At the head of the table sat Endeavor, a volcano in repose. His piercing turquoise gaze was fixed solely on Akira, who sat to his right. The boy, now a young man, ate with a mechanical precision, his posture perfect, his expression a neutral mask. He was taller, his frame lean but corded with the dense muscle born of brutal, unending training. Faint, silvery scars webbed the skin on his arms and neck, a permanent testament to his quirk's destructive toll and his body's slow, agonizing adaptation. You know your objective. Endeavor's voice was a low rumble, cutting through the silence like a fissure opening in the earth. It was not a question. To achieve the highest score in the history of the exam. Akira replied, his voice calm and even. To establish my dominance from the outset, and to demonstrate the absolute superiority of my quirk. No hesitation. No mercy. Overwhelming force is the only language they will understand. The words were a practiced mantra, recited 1,000 times in the dojo. Endeavor grunted, a sound of grim satisfaction. His gaze flickered for a fraction of a second to his other son. Shoto sat opposite Akira, a mirror image cast in shadow. He had the same handsome features, the same mismatched hair, though his was a clean split of crimson and white. But where Akira's face was a mask of hardened duty, Shoto's was one of quiet defiance. He ate his breakfast slowly, his presence so muted he might as well have been a watercolor painting of a boy. Endeavor's gaze passed over him as if he were part of the furniture. The spare. The failed draft. Do not be a disgrace, Endeavor said, his words directed at the empty space Shoto occupied. It was the only instruction he would receive. Shoto said nothing. He simply finished his soup, his mismatched eyes holding a depth of thought that their father had long since ceased to try and fathom. His mind wasn't on the exam, not entirely. It was on a memory from 3 weeks ago, an event that had burned itself into his conscience, hotter than any of his father's flames. 3 weeks earlier, the afternoon crowd in the shopping district was a chaotic symphony of noise and motion. Shoto moved through it like a ghost, his school bag slung over his shoulder, his presence deliberately unremarkable. He kept his head down, content to be just another face in the sea of humanity. He was on his way home from the library, a refuge of silence he often sought. It was a place devoid of screaming and the smell of scorched wood. Then the symphony turned into a scream. An explosion rocked the narrow street ahead. People shrieked and scattered, a wave of panic flowing back towards him. A monstrous, amorphous form made of foul-smelling green sludge was pouring out of a convenience store, laughing with a gurgling, wet sound. And it had a hostage. A boy with spiky ash-blonde hair was trapped within the swirling morass, his face a mask of rage and terror. Explosions erupted from his palms, muffled and ineffective against the fluid body of the villain. He can't get free! Someone yelled. Where are the heroes? Another cried. The pros were already there. Death Arms was trying to land a punch, but his fists sank uselessly into the sludge. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wood-based quirk useless against the liquid villain and the fires the hostage's quirk was starting. Backdraft was desperately trying to contain the flames. They were all doing their jobs, following protocol, but they were paralyzed. The villain's body was too difficult to restrain, and the hostage was too volatile. Shoto stood frozen at the edge of the chaos, clutching the strap of his bag. He saw the look in the blond boy's eyes, the desperate, suffocating panic of someone whose power had turned against them. He saw the heroes standing by, waiting for someone with their right quirk. His father's voice echoed in his head, a litany of indoctrination. A hero assesses the situation. A hero acts only when victory is assured. Do not engage in a fight you cannot win. Weakness is a sin. But what Shoto saw was not a tactical problem. He saw suffering. He saw a boy drowning on dry land. It was the same look he'd seen in his mother's eyes. It was the same terror he'd seen on Akira's face after a particularly brutal training session. It was the helpless agony of being trapped by a force you couldn't fight. And he couldn't stand it. He didn't think. His body moved on its own. He dropped his bag and ran, sprinting past the police cordon, past the stunned heroes. Hey! Kid! Get back here! Death Arms yelled. Shoto ignored him. He slid to a halt a few feet from the sludge villain, his right foot stomping down hard. A wave of ice, sharp and jagged, surged across the asphalt, racing towards the villain. It wasn't an attack meant to win. It was a desperate attempt to do something. Another little hero? The villain gurgled, its huge eyes swiveling to him. The ice slammed into the villain's base. It didn't freeze the whole body, but it did something crucial. It solidified the lower portion of the sludge, making it brittle. The blond boy Bakugo found a moment of leverage. He let out a furious roar, unleashing a massive explosion that blasted part of his face free of the slime. He sucked in a desperate gasp of air. What the hell are you doing, you half-and-half bastard? Bakugo screamed, though there was a note of relief in his fury. Trying to help. Shoto yelled back, planting his right hand on the ground. A larger, thicker wall of ice erupted, not aimed at the villain, but at the ground around him, trying to create a frozen cage, to give the heroes something solid to work with. It was a foolish, reckless move. The villain, enraged, swatted at him with a massive sludge tendril. Shoto wasn't fast enough. He threw up an arm to shield his face, and then, a roar that dwarfed all other sounds. "I am here!" All Might, in his full, glorious form, landed between Shoto and the villain. The sheer force of his arrival created a wind that pushed them all back. "Have no fear, citizens!" he boomed, his iconic smile a beacon in the chaos. "For I am here." What happened next was a blur of overwhelming power. A single punch. Texas smash! The air pressure alone was enough to liquefy the villain and splatter him across the street. Rain began to fall from a sky that had been clear seconds before. It was absolute, unbelievable strength. In the aftermath, as the heroes scraped the villain into a bottle and paramedics checked on a furious, humiliated Bakugo, Shoto slipped away. He didn't want praise or attention. He was shaking, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had been useless. He had been reckless. He had almost gotten himself killed, but for a few precious seconds he had made a difference. He had given that boy a breath of air. He didn't know that from a nearby alleyway, a skeletal, steam-wreathed figure had watched the entire event unfold. Toshinori Yagi had seen the pros hesitate. He had seen the raw, untamed power of the blonde boy. But most importantly, he had seen a quiet, mismatched-haired boy with no hope of victory run into certain danger, not for glory, but for the sole, pure purpose of saving a life. He had seen the heart of a true hero. Present day, the memory faded as Akira stood up from the breakfast table. "It is time," Endeavor rose with him. He placed a heavy, possessive hand on Akira's shoulder, his grip like iron. "Show them, Akira. Show them all what a Todoroki is." Akira nodded, his face impassive. "I will not fail." He and Shoto walked out of the house together, a silent, tense procession of two. They didn't speak on the way to the train station. There was nothing left to say. Their paths had been set in stone for a decade. Akira was marching towards his destiny. Shoto was just along for the ride. At the Yui orientation, they sat rows apart. Akira was in the front, absorbing every word from President Mike, his mind already calculating variables. He catalogued the quirks he could see on the other examinees, assessing threats, planning his route to total domination. When a tall, blue-haired boy stood up to question the exam pamphlet and chastise a green-haired boy for muttering, Akira filed him away as orderly, but rigid. A potential annoyance. Shoto sat near the back, a silent observer. He listened to the rules, but his focus was different. He watched the other students. He saw their excitement, their nervousness, their dreams reflected in their eyes. He saw the same blue-haired boy, Ida Tenya, and noted his earnestness. He saw a girl with a round, kind face, Uraraka Ochako, fidgeting with nervous energy. He wasn't sizing them up as competition. He was just seeing them. He was thinking about what kind of heroes they wanted to be. Then came the practical exam. They were separated into different battle centers. Akira was assigned to Battle Center B. As the massive gates slid open, he didn't wait for the starting buzzer. He moved. "A real hero doesn't wait for a signal." He heard President Mike squawk over the intercom, but he was already a blur of motion. His father's voice was the only sound in his head. Overwhelming. Decisive. Absolute. He saw a one-point robot rounding a corner. He didn't even break stride. His right hand erupted in a concentrated jet of flame, a miniature blowtorch that melted through the robot's head in a sizzle of molten metal. He was already moving on before it hit the ground. Two two-pointers burst from an alley. Akira's left foot stomped the ground, and a wave of jagged ice shot forward, impaling one robot and freezing the other to the spot. He didn't look back. He ran deeper into the city, a hunter seeking bigger prey. His quirk was a terrifying spectacle of efficiency. He flash-froze the joints of a three-pointer, immobilizing it, then tapped it with a superheated finger, causing the frozen metal to shatter from thermal shock. He unleashed a wave of fire down a narrow street, turning a cluster of robots into a river of slag. The air around him was a constant shimmer of heat haze and glittering ice crystals. The other examinees could only watch in awe and terror. They scrambled for the scraps he left behind. "What is that guy's quirk?" someone yelled. "He's a monster!" another cried. Akira heard them, but the words were just background noise. They were obstacles. Their points were his points. He pushed himself harder, the familiar, dual agony of burns and frostbite beginning to crawl up his limbs. The pain was his fuel. It was proof that he was trying, proof that he was obeying. 10 points. 25. 40. The count was a running tally in his mind. He saw a group of students struggling with a large three-pointer. He ignored them, vaulting over a car and blasting another robot to pieces. Rescue points were irrelevant. His father had been clear. Only villain points mattered. They were a pure measure of destructive capability. A measure of strength. By the time the final buzzer rang, Akira was standing in the center of a self-made wasteland of shattered ice and molten steel. He was panting, his body screaming in protest. His left arm was covered in a thick layer of frost. His knuckles on his right hand were red and blistering. He had 92 villain points. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that no one had come close. He had fulfilled his mission. Meanwhile, in Battle Center D, Shoto's exam was a completely different story. When the gates opened, he too moved immediately, but his purpose was different. He glided forward on a slick of ice, his movements efficient and quiet. He wasn't hunting. He was patrolling. He rounded a corner and saw a one-point robot bearing down on the kind-faced girl he'd seen earlier, Uraraka. She looked terrified, frozen in place. Shoto didn't attack the robot head-on. He slammed his right hand onto the side of a building, and a massive, curved ramp of ice erupted from the wall, intercepting the robot's charge and sending it careening harmlessly into a lamppost. "Are you all right?" Shoto asked, his voice even. "Whoa! Yes. Thank you," she said, her eyes wide with gratitude. She then tapped the stunned robot, which floated into the air, and released it. It crashed to the ground, disabled. "I got the points, but you saved me." Shoto just nodded and glided away. He wasn't here to rack up a score. He was here to prove to himself that he could be a hero on his own terms. His exam was a masterclass in defensive and strategic quirk use. He trapped robots in walls of ice, allowing other, more offense-oriented students to take them down. He created ice slides to help people evacuate from collapsing buildings caused by the bigger robots. He used his ice with a precision that was the polar opposite of Akira's overwhelming force, freezing a robot's legs to the pavement, disabling its weapon systems with a targeted ice shard, creating barriers to protect others from shrapnel. He barely used his fire. A small, almost subconscious puff of flame would occasionally melt the ice on his own feet to keep from slipping, but he never used it as a weapon. It was his father's power, and he wanted no part of it. Then, the ground began to shake. The zero-pointer, the colossal arena trap, lumbered into view, its massive form dwarfing the buildings. Everyone ran. It was a rational response. The robot was an obstacle, not an objective. But as Shoto was retreating, he heard a cry. He turned and saw that same girl, Uraraka, trapped under a pile of rubble that had been shaken loose by the robot's approach. Her leg was pinned. The zero-pointer's massive foot was rising, preparing to crush the very spot where she lay. Shoto's blood ran cold. The memory of the sludge villain, of his own helplessness, of his desperate, reckless charge, flashed in his mind. A hero saves people. He had no chance of destroying the robot. His ice wouldn't be enough. But he had to do something. He was about to rush in, to try and freeze the rubble to make it brittle enough to break, when something extraordinary happened. Uraraka, seeing the robot, touched the rubble pinning her and made it weightless, pulling herself free. Then, with a determined cry, she slapped her hands together. Instead of running, she began to float upwards, towards the zero-pointer's face. Shoto watched, stunned, as a boy with wild green hair, the same one who had been muttering during the orientation, leaped an impossible distance into the air, his body crackling with a strange green energy. He cocked back his fist and roared. Smash! The punch connected with the zero-pointer's head, and the entire top half of the robot imploded in a catastrophic explosion of metal. The boy began to fall, his arm and legs clearly, horribly broken. Before he hit the ground, Uraraka, still floating, slapped him on the back, arresting his fall. Shoto stared, his mind reeling. The power that boy had just displayed, it was on par with All Might. But the cost, it was devastating. He ran over as the final buzzer sounded. He used his eyes to create a quick, crude splint for the green-haired boy's leg to stabilize it before Recovery Girl arrived. He had only accumulated 28 villain points. But as he looked at the grateful faces of the students he had helped, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with scores. He had acted like a hero. His kind of hero. The sun was setting as the exhausted examinees filed out of the UA campus. Akira found Shoto near the main gate. The brothers stood in silence for a moment, one radiating the smug exhaustion of a conqueror, the other the quiet fatigue of a medic. I secured the top score, Akira stated, his voice laced with pride. 92 points. Father will be pleased, I'm sure he will, Shoto replied, his tone unreadable. Akira's sharp eyes narrowed, catching the subtle details of his brother's state. You are barely singed. Your ice output was minimal. You held back. It was an accusation. Why? Do you seek to disgrace him that much? I used what I needed, Shoto said simply, turning to walk away. He was tired of this conversation, a conversation they had been having for a decade. He had only taken a few steps down the quiet, tree-lined street when a voice called out to him. Young man! Wait a moment! Shoto turned. Hurrying towards him was a tall, skeletal man with sunken blue eyes and a shock of blonde hair that seemed too wild for his gaunt frame. He was wearing a baggy yellow suit and had a nervous, almost apologetic air about him. Shoto recognized him instantly, though he didn't let it show. He'd seen this man in the crowd during the sludge villain incident, just before All Might appeared. Can I help you? Shoto asked, his guard up. The man, who was now wheezing slightly from his short jog, leaned against a wall to catch his breath. Yes. I wanted to talk to you. My name is Yagi Tashinori, Todoroki Shoto, he replied, his tone clipped. I know, Tashinori said, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. He straightened up, and though his frame was emaciated, his eyes held an incredible intensity. I was at the sludge villain attack a few weeks ago. I saw what you did. You were the only one who moved. Shoto's eyes widened slightly. He had thought no one had truly noticed. It was reckless, Shoto said, deflecting. I was ineffective. You were. Tashinori agreed, nodding. It was a foolish, dangerous act. And you could have gotten yourself and the other boy killed. He paused, his gaze boring into Shoto. But you did it anyway. The pros, with all their power and experience, were frozen. They were weighing the risks, following procedure. But you saw someone in trouble, and your body moved before you had a chance to think. Tell me, young man, why did you run in? Shoto was taken aback by the directness of the question. He thought for a moment, his gaze turning inward. He thought of Akira's pained whimpers after training. He thought of his mother's tears. He thought of the desperate look in Bakugo's eyes. Because, Shoto said, his voice low but firm. He looked like he needed saving. Tashinori's smile widened, and it was as if the setting sun had suddenly decided to shine directly from his face. It was a weak, fragile light compared to the supernova of All Might's smile, but it was just as warm. All the great heroes have stories like that from their past, Tashinori said, his voice filled with a profound emotion. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. He took a deep breath, and the air around him seemed to change, to thicken with purpose. Young Todoroki. I have been searching for a long time. I have watched countless young people with powerful quirks, all striving to be number one, all seeking fame and fortune. I have seen them use their power for selfish reasons, to prove their own strength. He glanced back towards UA's gates, a subtle nod towards Akira's performance. But true strength, true heroism, it doesn't come from the power you're born with. It comes from the will to save others, from a heart that runs toward danger not for glory, but because someone is in need. He looked directly at Shoto, his sunken eyes blazing with an impossible fire. I saw that heart in you. You, a boy who has been told his entire life that he is a failure, a spare. You, who rejects the path of overwhelming force laid out for you. You have the heart of a true hero, and so, I have come to you with a proposal. Toshinori straightened to his full, gangly height. He held out a hand, his palm open and trembling slightly. My quirk is not just my own. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is the crystallization of power, a force that grows with each person who wields it. It is called One for All. Shoto's mind, always so calm and analytical, went completely blank. One for all. A transferable quirk? It sounded impossible. It sounded like something from a comic book. I can give you my power, Toshinori said, his voice ringing with conviction. And I have chosen you, Todoroki Shoto, to be my successor. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Shoto looked at the strange, skeletal man before him. He thought of his father's obsession with power, with bloodlines, with creating the perfect heir. He thought of Akira, his brother, broken and rebuilt in the image of that obsession. And now, this stranger was offering him a power far greater than anything his father could have ever dreamed of, not because of his blood, but because of his heart. A power that would be truly, undeniably his. Why? Shoto asked, the single word filled with a lifetime of doubt and confusion. Why me? Toshinori's smile was gentle, understanding. Because you, young man, have already shown me that you know what to do with it. I am not asking you to become the next All Might. I am asking if you will accept this power, and become the hero you were always meant to be. Shoto looked down at his own hands. His right, the source of his mother's gentle ice. His left, the source of his father's raging fire. And now, he was being offered a third path. A new power. A new destiny, a choice. For the first time in his life, he had a real choice. And as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Todoroki Shoto looked up at the man who was all might and felt the first, terrifying stirrings of hope. The first day at Ue High felt, to Todoroki Akira, like the first day of a war for which he had been preparing his entire life. He walked the hallowed halls not with the nervous excitement that buzzed around him like static electricity, but with the grim, focused calm of a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. His uniform was immaculate, his bag held just the essentials, and his mind was a fortress of his father's ambitions. He found Class 1A easily. The door was absurdly large, a statement of UA's go beyond philosophy that Akira found both ostentatious and logical. He slid it open and stepped inside, his turquoise eyes sweeping the room in a clinical assessment. He immediately spotted the tall, blue-haired boy from the exam orientation, Ida Tenya, arguing with a spiky-haired blonde who was defiantly resting his feet on his desk. Akira recognized the blonde instantly from Shoto's account of the sludge villain incident, Bakugo Katsuki. His file was marked volatile, high offense, Edo-driven. A rival, perhaps, but an undisciplined one. A girl with a round face and brown hair was trying to mediate. The rest of the class was a scattered collection of unique faces and nervous chatter. Then, his gaze found Shoto. His twin was already seated near the back corner by the window, a position that maximized his view of the classroom while minimizing his own visibility. He was staring out at the cherry blossoms, seemingly lost in thought, a portrait of serene detachment. Akira felt a familiar prickle of irritation. Even here, at the peak of Heroes Society, Shoto insisted on acting like a spectator. Akira chose a desk in the front row, directly in the center. A position of prominence. A throne in waiting. He sat down, placed his bag neatly beside him, and stared straight ahead, ignoring the whispers and curious glances his stark white hair and the faint, lattice-like scars on his neck were drawing. If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave, the voice came from the floor. A yellow sleeping bag, resembling a giant, man-sized caterpillar, wriggled its way into the room. A man with tired, bloodshot eyes, long black hair, and a face that looked like it hadn't seen a moment of joy in a decade emerged. Welcome to UA's hero course, Shota Aizawa said, his voice a monotone drone of pure exhaustion. He took a long, noisy slurp from a juice pouch. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. He tossed a set of blue gym uniforms onto his desk. Put these on and meet me on the field. We're having a quirk apprehension test. The grumbles of confusion and protest from the class were immediate. But what about orientation? The brown-haired girl, Uraraka, asked. Here at UA, we're not tethered to traditions, Aizawa said, his back already to them. You're heroes in training. You don't have time for frivolous ceremonies. On the field, the full weight of their new reality set in. Aizawa explained the test, a series of standard physical fitness assessments they'd done since middle school, but this time, they were allowed to use their quirks. And one more thing, he added, a cruel, thin smile gracing his lips. The student who finishes in last place will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately. A wave of panic washed over the class. This was it. The first culling. Akira, however, felt a surge of anticipation. This was a language he understood. A direct, brutal competition, a chance to immediately establish the hierarchy. The first test was a 50-meter dash. Ida Tenya, with the engines in his calves, set a blistering pace. A girl with frog-like features, Ajitsuyu, used her tongue to propel herself. Bakugo used his explosions to fly. When it was Akira's turn, he didn't bother running. He stood at the starting line, planted his feet, and aimed his palms behind him. With a controlled roar, twin jets of fire erupted, launching him forward like a human rocket. He crossed the finish line in 2.12 seconds, a blur of heat and motion. The ground behind him was scorched black. He glanced over at Bakugo, whose eyes were narrowed with a competitive fury. A new rival had officially entered his orbit. Shoto's turn was far less dramatic. He glided across the distance on a path of ice, his movements smooth and silent. It was fast, efficient, but lacked the explosive, headline-grabbing power Akira had displayed. Akira watched him, a familiar disappointment churning in his gut. He's still holding back, still clinging to that useless rebellion. The test continued. In the grip strength test, Akira superheated the muscles in his arm for a burst of power, nearly crushing the device, while a six-armed boy named Shoji recorded an even more impressive score through sheer physical mutation. In the standing long jump, Bakugo and a boy with a laser in his navel, Oyama, used their quirks to clear the sandbox entirely. Akira used a blast of cold air pressure from his feet to launch himself, a more controlled but equally effective method. Through it all, Shoto performed adequately, using his ice with creative and efficient precision. He created an ice pillar to push himself higher in the vertical jump and slicked the ground to gain momentum for the sidesteps. He was consistently in the middle of the pack, never excelling, never failing. He was making himself unremarkable. The final test was the ball throw. Uraraka Ochako shocked everyone by scoring an infinity, using her zero-gravity quirk. It was a clever, outside-the-box application that even Akira had to begrudgingly respect. Todoroki, Akira, you're up, Aizawa called. Akira stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling small and insignificant in his palm. He could feel the eyes of the class on him. He could feel the weight of his father's expectations, an invisible brand on his soul. Show them what true power looks like. He took a deep breath, channeling his quirk. His right arm began to glow, heat shimmering around it. Simultaneously, a thin layer of frost coated his left hand and crept up his neck, a necessary counterbalance to keep his core temperature stable. He wound up, his body a coiled spring of elemental energy. With a roar that was more for show than necessity, he threw the ball. The force of the throw was augmented by a concussive blast of superheated air that erupted from his palm at the moment of release. The ball vanished, a screaming speck in the sky. Aizawa's device beeped. 987.4 meters, a collective gasp went through the class. It was a monstrous display of raw power. Bakugo's face was a mask of incandescent rage, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles were white. Next, Todoroki Shoto. Shoto stepped into the circle, his expression as placid as a frozen lake. He took the ball, his mismatched eyes betraying nothing. Akira watched him, a silent command passing between them, "Don't embarrass our name. At least try." Shoto took a stance. The air around his right arm grew cold. He was going to use his ice, as usual. Predictable. Safe. Pathetic. But then, something different happened. Shoto's jaw clenched. Akira saw him subtly shift his weight, planting his feet firmly, his body tensing in a way Akira had never seen before. It wasn't the posture for generating ice. It was a power stance. Clench your buttocks and yell this from the bottom of your heart. The memory of All Might's, of Yagi's, strange but earnest advice echoed in his mind. Shoto reared back his arm. For a split second, a flicker of something, a crackle of untamed green energy, danced across his skin. It was so fast, so faint, that anyone else would have missed it, but Akira saw it. And Aizawa, his own quirk-erasing eyes sharp, saw it too. Shoto threw. He didn't use a blast of ice or fire. Instead, at the last possible moment, he focused everything he had, the confusing, overwhelming power that Yagi had bestowed upon him just a week ago, into the tip of his index finger. Smash! The word was a choked, desperate yell, not the triumphant roar of All Might. But the result was undeniable. The sound barrier broke with a deafening crack. The ball shot from his hand with the force of a cannonball, leaving a visible shockwave in its wake. It flew higher and faster than Akira's, a white missile against the blue canvas of the sky. But the price was immediate and brutal. Shoto cried out, staggering back and clutching his right hand. His index finger was shattered, bent at an unnatural angle, swollen to a grotesque size, and glowing with a sickening purple-black hue. The green lightning that had briefly enveloped his arm vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The class was stunned into absolute silence. The only sound was Shoto's harsh, pained breathing. Aizawa's device beeped, its screen showing a number that seemed impossible, 998.6 meters. He had beaten Akira. The teacher stared at Shoto, his usual tired expression replaced by one of sharp, analytical curiosity. What was that? Shoto, cradling his ruined finger, looked up, his gaze defiant. My power! The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. From the back of the group, a thin, frail-looking boy with green hair and a mess of freckles, the one who had broken himself to destroy the zero-pointer, was staring at Shoto, his eyes wide with a unique, shocked understanding. Izuka Midoriya knew that power. He recognized that self-destructive backlash. But how? Akira was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. It wasn't ice. It wasn't fire. It was something else entirely. A raw, untamed force that had dwarfed his own calculated, perfected display. A power that broke his brother even as it propelled him to victory. He felt a complex, ugly emotion coiling in his gut. It was confusion. It was anger. But beneath it all, for the first time in his life, he felt a sliver of something he had never directed at his inferior twin, a sharp, biting pang of jealousy. Aizawa finally lowered the device, a smirk playing on his lips. By the way, he said to the stunned class, I was lying about the expulsion. It was a rational deception to push you to your limits. The collective sigh of relief was palpable, but Akira didn't hear it. His eyes were locked on his brother, who was now being tended to by a concerned Ida. The final rankings were posted. 1. Momo Yayorozu, whose creation quirk had allowed her to craft the perfect tool for every test. 2. Todoroki Akira. 3. Bakugo Katsuki. 4. Ida Tenya. 5. Todoroki Shoto. Akira was second. Not first. He had been beaten. And worse, he had been beaten by Shoto, who now sat fifth despite his inferior quirk and his new, self-destructive secret weapon. His father's words echoed in his head, a baseline against which your own superiority can be measured. Today, that baseline had surpassed him. The walk back to the classroom was tense. Bakugo stomped ahead, radiating pure fury, occasionally glancing back at both Akira and Shoto as if deciding who he hated more. Hey! Todoroki! Akira turned. Bakugo was pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at him. You icy hot bastard! I don't know what your deal is, but you're my rival now. I'm going to beat you and become the #1 hero, you got that? Akira simply stared at him, his expression cold. Your ambition is loud. Your power is undisciplined. You are not a rival. You are a momentary obstacle. Bakugo looked ready to spontaneously combust. What did you say to me, you scar-faced punk? Before the confrontation could escalate, a hand wrapped in bandages clamped down on Bakugo's shoulder. It was Aizawa. That's enough. Get to class. Akira brushed past them, his mind elsewhere. He wasn't concerned with Bakugo's childish declarations. His problem was far closer to home. He found Shoto outside the classroom, leaning against the wall, his newly bandaged finger held carefully at his side. The neutral mask was back on his face, but Akira could see the lines of pain around his eyes. "What was that?" Akira demanded, his voice low and intense, for there is only on the field the green lightning. "That wasn't your quirk." Shoto met his gaze, and for the first time, Akira didn't see pity or quiet anger in his twin's eyes. He saw something new. He saw defiance. It was the look of a person who had finally found a weapon of their own. "You're right," Shoto said, his voice quiet but firm. "It wasn't. It's my power." "Your power?" Akira scoffed, the sound sharp and brittle. "Where did you get it? Did father arrange for some secret training? Some quirk-enhancing drug?" The idea was absurd, but his mind was scrambling for a logical explanation. Endeavor's world was one of bloodlines and eugenics. Power was inherited, not found. "It has nothing to do with him," Shoto said, and the conviction in his voice was absolute. He pushed himself off the wall, preparing to enter the classroom. "And it's none of your business." "None of my business?" Akira took a step forward, cornering him. The air between them crackled with a tension colder than any ice Shoto could produce. "You humiliate me in front of the entire class with some borrowed trick, and you say it's none of my business? Everything you do reflects on me, on our family, on father's name." "I don't care about his name," Shoto shot back, his voice rising for the first time. The mask was gone, revealing the raw, wounded anger beneath. "And I don't care about his ambitions for you. I'm not his failure anymore, Akira. And I'm not your shadow." He looked past Akira, at the path ahead, at the classroom door that represented a future he was now carving for himself. "I'm going to be a hero. My way. With my own power." He pushed past his brother, leaving Akira standing alone in the hallway, the words echoing in the sudden silence. The foundations of Akira's world, built on the simple, brutal axioms of his father's design, were beginning to crack. For 10 years, he had been the chosen one, the masterpiece. Shoto was the afterthought, the spare. But today, the spare had revealed a secret strength, a power that came from an unknown source, wielded with a terrifying, self-destructive will. And in that moment, standing in the sterile, quiet hallway of UA High, Todoroki Akira was forced to confront a possibility he had never before considered. What if his father had chosen the wrong son? The air in the monitoring room was thick with anticipation. On a vast wall of high-definition screens, every angle of Battleground Beta was displayed in stark, clinical detail. The members of Class 1A, clad in their newly unveiled hero costumes, murmured amongst themselves, their excitement a stark contrast to the grim silence that had fallen over the two Todoroki twins. "For this exercise," All Might's voice boomed through the speakers, his image dominating the central screen. "You will be divided into teams of 2, heroes and villains. The villains will guard a nuclear weapon prop hidden within the building. The hero's objective is to either capture the weapon or apprehend both villains within the time limit. It's a test of combat prowess, strategic thinking, and teamwork." Akira barely heard him. His focus was entirely on the lots they were about to draw. He could feel Shoto's presence a few feet away, a quiet, challenging stillness that grated on his nerves more than any of Bakugo's loud proclamations. The disastrous quirk apprehension test had shattered the established order of his world. Shoto's mysterious, self-destructive power was a variable he couldn't account for, an unknown equation that mocked his analytical mind. He needed to understand it. He needed to see it in action, to dissect its strengths and weaknesses. He needed to face it. "And the first teams to face OFF will be..." All Might paused for dramatic effect, 2 balls drawn from the lottery boxes. "These guys," the screen flashed with the matchups. Team A, Heroes Todoroki Akira Ida Tenya. Team D, Villains Todoroki Shoto Uraraka Ochako. A collective gasp went through the room. The whispers intensified. "Whoa, the 2 top scorers from the practical are on the same team." "Yeah, but they're up against the other Todoroki. The one with that insane ball throw. The brothers are fighting each other? This is gonna be intense." Akira's heart gave a hard, single thud against his ribs. It was perfect. Fate, or perhaps All Might's deliberate hand, had given him exactly what he wanted, a direct confrontation. A controlled environment where he could force Shoto to reveal his hand. He looked over at his twin. Shoto's expression was unreadable, but his mismatched eyes met Akira's across the room. There was no flicker of fear, only a quiet, steady resolve. This was not the brother he knew. This was a stranger wearing Shoto's face. Ida Tenya marched over to Akira, his movements crisp and robotic. His costume was a magnificent suit of silver armor, complete with intricate exhaust pipes at his calves. Todoroki-kun, it is an honor to be partnered with you. Your performance in the entrance exam was a model of efficiency and power. I have already formulated several strategic approaches we can employ. Akira's costume, in stark contrast, was brutally simplistic. It was a form-fitting, fire-resistant jumpsuit of dark blue and gray, designed for maximum mobility. The only notable features were sophisticated-looking silver bracers on his wrists and ankles, thermal regulators designed by his father's support team to help him vent excess heat and cold, a crutch he despised but was forced to use. On his back was a small, metallic canister containing medical supplies, another of his father's mandates. A hero must be self-sufficient. Our strategy is simple, Ida-kun, Akira said, his voice cold and final, cutting off Ida's enthusiastic planning. We overwhelm them with speed and power. I will neutralize my brother, and you will secure the weapon. There is no need for complexity. Ida's hand-chopping motion stuttered. But Todoroki-kun, teamwork is a cornerstone of heroics. We must consider our opponent's quirks. Uraraka-kun's zero gravity is a formidable variable, and your brother's abilities are. He trailed off, unsure how to classify the power that had shattered Shoto's finger. His abilities are irrelevant, Akira stated, turning his gaze toward the screens where Shoto and Uraraka were being shown their building layout. He will be defeated before he has a chance to use them. His arrogance was a shield, masking a roiling sea of uncertainty. He was projecting the absolute confidence his father demanded, even as Shoto's quiet defiance gnawed at his own. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in his sterile, high-tech office, Endeavor watched a private feed of the UA exercise, his face a mask of stone. His fist was clenched so tightly on his desk that the metal groaned in protest. What is the meaning of this? He growled to the empty room. Pitting him against that failure? And pairing Akira with that rigid little fool from the Ida family? His obsession had only deepened over the years. He monitored Akira's progress with the intensity of a hawk watching its only chick. Every victory was his own. Every stumble, a personal insult. Shoto's unexpected performance at the quirk test had been a source of profound irritation. He dismissed it as a fluke, a desperate, one-off trick. Now, All Might was giving that trick a spotlight. Show him his place, Akira. Endeavor whispered to the screen, his turquoise eyes blazing. Show them all why you are the masterpiece. Make him use my power. Make him admit his own inferiority by relying on the flame I gave him. For Endeavor, this wasn't just a training exercise. It was a public validation of his life's work. Inside Battleground Beta, Shoto and Uraraka stood beside the prop weapon on the 5th floor of a sparse, concrete office building. The air was cool and still. Uraraka was fidgeting, her round helmet unable to hide her nervousness. Okay, so we're the villains, she said, trying to sound cheerful. Your brother, he's really intense, isn't he? His fire in the dash was incredible. And Ida-kun is so fast. This is going to be tough. Shoto's costume was a simple white tunic and trousers, with his left side, from his hair to his torso, covered in a jagged layer of what looked like solid ice. It was purely aesthetic, a visual representation of his rejection. A statement. He was only half of himself, by choice. On his back was a small pouch with a first aid kit, a habit ingrained from years of being Akira's personal medic. He placed a hand on the papier-mâché bomb. Akira's strategy will be direct. He believes in overwhelming force above all else. He'll come straight for us, likely using his eyes to immobilize the entire building from the outside. The whole building? Uraraka squeaked. It's what father taught him. A display of power to demoralize the opponent before the fight even begins. Shoto explained, his voice devoid of emotion. He'll expect me to meet his ice with my own, a direct contest of strength. He wants to prove his fusion quirk is superior to my split one. So what do we do? Uraraka asked, her trust in his calm analysis evident. Shoto looked at her, his mismatched eyes holding a surprising clarity. We don't play his game. He's predictable because he's fighting for our father. I'm fighting for me. That's our advantage. He turned to the window, looking down at the street below. He's coming. Hero team, begin! All Might's voice declared. The moment the words were spoken, Akira acted. He placed his left palm flat against the exterior wall of the building. Ida, get ready to move. They're on the 5th floor. How do you know that? Ida asked, startled. The subtle temperature fluctuations. My senses are more acute than yours, Akira stated simply. It wasn't a boast, it was a fact. He could feel the minute heat signatures of 2 bodies near the top of the structure. Without another word, he unleashed his power. A tidal wave of ice surged up the side of the building, thick, white, and brutally cold. It encased the entire structure in a matter of seconds, frost blooming across the windows, the concrete groaning under the sudden temperature drop. It was a tactic designed to shock and awe, to end the fight before it began by freezing his opponents in their tracks. It was a page taken directly from Endeavor's playbook. The building is secure, Akira said, pulling his hand away. The bracer on his wrist glowed red as it vented a plume of steam, siphoning off the dangerous cold feedback. Let's go. Ida, your speed is our primary asset for retrieval. Go. They entered the building. The interior was an Arctic wasteland. The floors, walls, and ceilings were coated in a thick layer of slick, treacherous ice. For Akira, who could regulate the temperature of his own feet, it was no obstacle. For Ida, it was a nightmare. Todoroki-kun, my engines rely on traction. I cannot achieve maximum velocity on this surface. Ida exclaimed, windmilling his arms to keep his balance. Akira didn't spare him a glance. Improvise. A hero adapts to the battlefield. He was already moving up the first flight of stairs, his senses peeled, listening for any sound, any sign of his brother. The silence was unnerving. They reached the 2nd floor. Still nothing. The 3rd. The silence grew heavier. This is strange, Ida managed, carefully skating his way up behind Akira. Logically, they should have engaged us by now, or we should hear them fortifying their position. Akira felt it too. A prickle of unease. This wasn't right. Shoto, even when holding back, was reactive. He should be countering, erecting his own ice walls, challenging Akira's dominance. This passivity was tactical. As they stepped onto the 4th floor landing, Akira's foot came down on something that wasn't ice. It was a small, almost invisible wire stretched taut across the top step. A trap. Before he could react, the wire triggered a mechanism. From the ceiling, a huge chunk of debris, a concrete slab Uraraka must have made weightless and positioned earlier, came plummeting down. Ida, move! Akira yelled, his battle instincts taking over. He shoved Ida back down the stairs as he simultaneously unleashed a pillar of fire straight up. The intense heat slammed into the falling slab, not destroying it, but slowing its descent and cracking it into smaller, more manageable pieces that crashed around them with deafening force. Smoke and dust filled the stairwell. Through the haze, Akira saw a figure dart away down the 4th floor corridor. Shoto. He's baiting us! Akira snarled, the realization dawning on him. This wasn't a contest of power. It was a shell game. Ida, the bomb is the objective! They're trying to split us up! Get to the 5th floor now. I will handle Shoto. Understood! Ida shouted, revving his engines and carefully maneuvering his way up the rubble-strewn stairs. Akira didn't hesitate. He burst down the 4th floor hallway, his feet melting the ice beneath him for traction. He rounded a corner and saw him. Shoto was standing at the far end of a long, open-plan office space, the floor littered with frozen cubicle walls. This foolishness ends now, Shoto! Akira called out, his voice echoing in the frigid space. The temperature around him began to rise, melting the ice on the walls, steam hissing into the air. Stop hiding behind tricks and face me. Shoto stood his ground, his expression calm. I'm not hiding, Akira. I'm thinking. It's a skill father never valued. The words were a physical blow. Rage, hot and pure, flared in Akira's chest. You dare lecture me? You, who spent your entire life as a shadow. You know nothing of strength, he attacked. A wave of jagged ice, far larger and more violent than anything he'd used on the building's exterior, shot across the floor. It was a move designed to shatter, to impale, to utterly dominate. Shoto didn't try to match it. Instead, he stomped his right foot, and a massive, perfectly smooth wall of ice erupted from the floor, intercepting Akira's attack with a deafening crash. But it was more than just a wall. As Akira's ice shattered against it, Shoto was already moving, using the momentary cover to slide down a new path of his own creation, creating tunnels and diversions within the frozen labyrinth of the office. He wasn't trying to overpower Akira. He was outthinking him, using the environment to his advantage. Fight me! Akira roared, his frustration mounting. He blasted a path through Shoto's wall with a torrent of fire, the sudden shift in temperature causing the air to crackle. Stop running like a coward! He pursued his brother through the maze of ice and melted cubicles. It was a frustrating, infuriating chase. Every time Akira thought he had him cornered, Shoto would erect another wall, create another slide, or use a small, precise burst of ice to alter the terrain. He was a ghost, always one step ahead. Finally, in a large, empty conference room, Akira trapped him. He sealed the only exit with a thick wall of ice and advanced on his brother, the air around him shimmering with condensed heat. His body was starting to protest the rapid, violent shifts in temperature. His joints ached with a deep, penetrating cold, while his skin felt flushed and raw. No more running! Akira panted, stalking forward. No more games. I want to see it. That power you used. Show it to me. Show me the strength you think makes you my equal. Shoto stood with his back to the far wall, his ruined finger from the day before a stark reminder of the cost of that power. He looked at his brother, at the desperation and rage burning in his eyes, and he felt a pang of pity. This isn't about being your equal, Akira, Shoto said, his voice quiet but resonant. It's about being free from him. You are a fool if you think you can ever be free! Akira bellowed, lunging forward. He didn't use fire or ice. This was personal. He threw a punch, a strike honed by years of brutal martial arts training under their father. Shoto, to Akira's shock, sidestepped the blow with a fluidity he never possessed before. His movements were different, more grounded, more centered. Yagi's brief but intense instruction on the basics of channeling one for all through his entire body, even at 0%, had fundamentally changed his posture and balance. Akira stumbled, off balance. Shoto didn't counterattack. He simply created more distance. Stop this foolishness! Akira roared, his control finally snapping. His body erupted in a maelstrom of power, flames licking up his right side, a thick rime of frost coating his left. Use your fire! It's the only power you have that can match this. Fight me properly, he was begging. Begging his brother to validate their father's philosophy. Begging him to admit that, in the end, only overwhelming power mattered. Shoto looked at his brother, wreathed in self-destructive glory, a perfect weapon breaking himself on his master's command. And the pity in his heart solidified into a hard, cold certainty. I don't need his power to be a hero, Shoto said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. Meanwhile, on the floor above, Ida Tenya had found the weapon. He was standing beside it, his posture rigid, trying to fully embody the role of a villain. Mwahaha! You've found my secret lair, heroes! But you shall never lay a hand on my precious weapon. Sorry, Ida-kun! Uraraka's voice came from above. Ida looked up just as Uraraka, who had been hiding on the ceiling, pushed off, using her quirk on herself. She floated down and, with a surprisingly agile flip, bypassed his guard and slapped both her hands onto the bomb. I got it! She cheered into her comms. Downstairs, the battle between brothers had reached its crescendo. Akira, enraged by Shoto's defiance, was gathering his energy for one final, decisive attack. A massive, swirling vortex of fire and ice, a technique their father had named heaven-piercing inferno, designed to be inescapable. If you will not fight me as my equal, Akira snarled, the energy tearing at his body, his skin cracking under the strain. Then you will fall as my inferior! He was about to unleash it when Uraraka's voice crackled through his earpiece. Todoroki-kun! Ida-kun! I touched the bomb! We win! The declaration hung in the air. The exercise was over, but Akira didn't stop. The rage, the frustration, the lifetime of being honed into a single-purpose weapon, it all poured out. He unleashed the attack anyway. Shoto's eyes widened. He had no time to erect a wall. The swirling vortex of elemental fury was too fast, too vast. He had two choices: be incinerated, or fight back. Clench your buttocks and yell this from the bottom of your heart, All Might's voice. A different path. His own path. He couldn't control it yet, not really. It was still a wild, untamed beast within him. But he could aim it. He dropped into a low stance, channeling the crackling green energy not into a finger or a fist, but down through his legs. He stomped his foot down with all his might. Detroit! Smash! He didn't yell the words. He didn't have to. The power spoke for itself. He channeled a mere 5% of one for all into the floor. The result was catastrophic. The entire concrete floor of the conference room didn't just crack, it exploded upwards. A shockwave of pure kinetic force erupted from the point of impact, meeting Akira's attack head-on. The two forces collided with a deafening roar that shook the entire building to its foundations. Shoto's controlled explosion of force, focused and directed, was more fundamentally powerful than Akira's wild, elemental fury. The floor shattered, sending shrapnel and debris everywhere, completely disrupting and dissipating Akira's attack. The raw power of the shockwave threw Akira off his feet, sending him tumbling back into the ice wall he had created. When the dust settled, the room was a ruin. A massive crater marked where Shoto had stood. He was now on the floor below, having ridden the collapsing floor down, landing in a crouch. His leg was screaming in agony, the muscles torn, the bone likely fractured from the backlash, but it was intact. Akira lay in a heap against the far wall, his body steaming and frosted, his quirk extinguished. He was uninjured by the blast, but utterly, profoundly defeated. The heroes had technically won the match based on the time it took for Uraraka to secure the bomb, but everyone in the monitoring room knew who had won the real fight. Silence reigned in the monitoring room. The students of Class 1A stared at the screen, their mouths agape. They had just witnessed a battle of ideologies, a war fought with ice, fire, and a mysterious, terrifying new power. Holy crap! Kaminari whispered, summing up the mood of the entire room. Bakugo was staring at the screen, his usual rage replaced by a look of stunned, grudging respect aimed at Shoto. He had seen power. Raw, untamed, awe-inspiring power. All Might stood before the monitors, his signature smile gone. In its place was a complex expression of pride, concern, and grim satisfaction. He had chosen well. The boy had the heart, and now he was beginning to grasp the power. But the cost was high. He spoke into the microphone, his voice regaining its booming cheer, though it felt slightly forced. Hero team. Why-ins! The post-match analysis was a tense affair. All Might stood before the four participants, his towering presence filling the room. Young Ida, your commitment to the role was commendable, but you were too rigid. You must learn to adapt to your opponent's unpredictability. All Might said, giving him a thumbs up. Young Uraraka, your strategy was clever and your execution flawless. An excellent victory! He then turned to the Todoroki twins. The room grew quiet. Young Akira, All Might said, his voice softer now. You possess incredible power. Truly magnificent. But you let your personal feelings cloud your judgment. You became obsessed with your opponent and lost sight of the mission. A hero's greatest strength is not his quirk, but his heart and his mind. You must learn to control your emotions as well as you control the elements. Every word was a twisting knife in Akira's pride. He stood there, his head bowed, saying nothing. He had failed. Not just the exercise, but his father's core tenets. He had lost control. Finally, All Might looked at Shoto, who was leaning against the wall, his face pale with pain from his leg. And young Shoto, All Might began, his voice filled with a complex warmth. Your strategy was brilliant. Your teamwork, exemplary. You understood your opponent's mindset and used it against him. He paused, his gaze dropping to Shoto's injured leg. However, that last move was reckless. You cannot continue to destroy your own body. A hero who cannot stand cannot save anyone. You must learn to control that power, to tame it. We will work on it. It was a quiet acknowledgement of their shared secret, a promise of tutelage that only they understood. For the first time, Akira felt a sensation that was entirely alien to him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't shame. It was a deep, hollow feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had followed his father's teachings to the letter. He had used overwhelming force. He had tried to prove his superiority, and he had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and ultimately, overpowered. He looked at his brother, the failure, the spare, who was now being praised by the #1 hero for his strategy and heart. The rivalry was no longer about proving his father right. It was about proving he himself wasn't wrong. The field trip to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was supposed to be a breath of fresh air. For most of Class 1A, it was a welcome respite from the intense, competitive atmosphere that had defined their first week at UA. The bus ride was filled with the easy, boisterous chatter of teenagers. Kaminari was trying to flirt with Jiro, Kirishima and Bakugo were having a loud, one-sided argument about what constituted a manly, fighting style, and Ajiri Tsuyu was posing blunt, disarming questions that made everyone laugh. Akira sat alone, staring out the window, a silent island in the sea of camaraderie. He had replayed the battle trial in his mind 1,000 times, each viewing a fresh exercise in self-flagellation. All Might's critique had been a searing indictment of his entire upbringing. You let your personal feelings cloud your judgment. A hero's greatest strength is not his quirk, but his heart and his mind. The words were a direct contradiction to everything Endeavor had ever taught him. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, a hairline fracture in the foundation of his belief system, had begun to form. He had followed the path of power, and it had led him to humiliating defeat. His gaze flickered across the aisle to where Shoto was sitting with Midoriya Izuku. The two of them were talking in low, earnest tones. Midoriya, the boy who seemed to break his own bones every time he used his quirk, was gesturing animatedly, while Shoto listened with a quiet intensity Akira had never seen him direct at anyone before. A strange alliance was forming there, a kinship of self-destructive power. Akira felt a pang of something cold and sharp, not just jealousy, but a profound sense of isolation. They had a secret, a shared language of green lightning and broken bones, and he was on the outside, looking in. We're here! Look sharp, everyone! Ida's voice cut through the noise as the bus pulled to a stop before a massive, domed structure. The interior of the USJ was breathtaking. It was a sprawling landscape of meticulously replicated disaster zones, a shipwreck in a churning pool, a landslide of rock and rubble, a burning cityscape, a wind-battered plaza. Standing at the entrance to greet them were the Space Hero, 13, and to everyone's surprise, a tired-looking Aizawa. Where's All Might? Uraraka asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. He had to deal with some hero business on his way to work. Aizawa grumbled, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe it. He's running on a timer. He'll meet us here later. 13 began their speech about the dangers of quirks, about the importance of using their powers to save lives, not to inflict harm. The words washed over Akira. Save lives. It was a simple, noble concept, but in his mind, it was secondary. The primary objective was always to neutralize the threat. Saving lives was a byproduct of victory, not the goal itself. Or was that wrong, too? The lights in the facility flickered and died. The central plaza's water fountain sputtered and went still. A strange, dark miasma, like a blot of ink in water, materialized at the center of the plaza. It expanded, swirling, and from its depths, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. Aizawa's entire demeanor shifted. His usual lethargy vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. 13, protect the students! He yelled, pulling his signature yellow goggles over his eyes. Kaminari, try to get a signal out. Those are real villains! The class gasped, a wave of fear and disbelief rippling through them. Akira's hand went to the thermal regulators on his wrists, his mind instantly shifting into combat mode. All the confusion and self-doubt were burned away by a cold, clear surge of adrenaline. This wasn't a test. This was real. A man whose entire body seemed to be made of purple-black mist coalesced before them, his yellow eyes glowing malevolently. Greetings. We are the League of Villains. We've taken the liberty of inviting ourselves into this haven of heroism to say hello. His voice was unnervingly polite. Our objective is a simple one, to kill the symbol of peace, All Might. Before anyone could react, Aizawa was in motion, his capture weapon lashing out as he leaped down the massive staircase to engage the horde of villains below. He was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, his quirk-erasing glare flickering from one target to the next, followed by a brutal, efficient takedown. We won't let you! Kirishima and Bakugo roared, charging forward at the mist villain. The villain, Kurojiri, simply expanded his form. My, such youthful exuberance, Kurojiri said. But my role is to scatter you and torture you to death. A dome of purple mist exploded outwards, engulfing the students. Akira felt a sickening, disorienting sensation of being pulled through space. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of black and purple, and then, with a jarring lurch, he was spat out, landing hard on loose rock and dirt. He pushed himself up, his senses on high alert. He was in the landslide zone, a treacherous landscape of steep cliffs and jagged boulders. A few feet away, Bakugo was picking himself up, his expression one of pure, unadulterated fury. That bastard! Bakugo snarled, small explosions popping in his palms. He teleported us! Where are the others? Akira scanned the area. They weren't alone. Several villains, all dressed in ragged street clothes and sporting minor, thuggish mutations, were advancing on them, their faces twisted into cruel sneers. Looks like we got a couple of the kiddies. One with rocky skin grunted. Let's see what they're made of before we kill them. Another with long, blade-like fingers hissed. Bakugo grinned, a feral, bloodthirsty expression. Oh, you want to see what we're made of? Fine by me. He blasted forward, his explosions echoing like cannon fire through the rocky canyon. Akira didn't share his enthusiasm. This wasn't a game. He analyzed the situation with the cold logic his father had drilled into him. Approximately 7 hostiles. All appear to be low-level thugs, likely recruited for numbers. Their quirks seem to be simple physical enhancements. Bakugo's frontal assault is reckless but effective at drawing their attention. My role is support and elimination of key threats. He raised his left hand, and a sheet of slick, near-frictionless ice coated the ground in front of a charging, bull-like villain. The thug's feet went out from under him, and he crashed headfirst into a boulder with a sickening crunch. Akira was already moving, his right hand wreathed in flame. He unleashed a precise, controlled jet of fire that superheated the rocky ground beneath another villain, causing him to yelp and stumble back. He and Bakugo, despite their antagonistic relationship, fell into a brutally effective rhythm. Bakugo was the berserker, a whirlwind of explosions and furious aggression, forcing the villains onto the defensive. Akira was the tactician, the sniper, using his fire and ice with chilling precision to disable, disorient, and neutralize them from a distance. He froze a villain's legs to the ground, leaving him vulnerable to Bakugo's follow-up blast. He created a wall of fire to cut off their escape route, funneling them into Bakugo's explosive range. Within a minute, the thugs were all unconscious or incapacitated. Ha! Was that all they got? Bakugo crowed, wiping a trickle of sweat from his brow. A bunch of weak-ass extras! Akira didn't answer. He was looking up, towards the top of the cliff. Kirishima Aijiro was there, his hardening quirk activated, fighting off another group. We need to regroup with the others, Akira stated, his voice flat. Our objective should be to find 13 and secure an escape route. Like hell! Bakugo shot back. I'm gonna find that warp gate bastard and blast him back to whatever shithole he crawled out of. He pointed toward the central plaza, where the real chaos was unfolding. That's where the real fight is! Before Akira could argue, Bakugo blasted his way up the cliff face, leaving Akira alone with the unconscious villains. He let out a frustrated sigh. Bakugo's single-minded aggression was both an asset and a liability. Arguing was pointless. Following him was the only logical course of action. As he began his ascent, something caught his eye. Down in the wreckage zone, he could see a small group of his classmates, Yayorozu, Jiro, and Kaminari, huddled behind a rock, looking terrified as a physically imposing villain advanced on them. Kaminari was being held, a hand clamped over his mouth, a weapon to his throat. Akira's first, instinctual thought was to analyze the threat. Large villain, likely a strength enhancer. Hostage situation. Direct engagement is risky for the hostage. My fire is too indiscriminate. My ice. And then, his thoughts stuttered. He saw the genuine, stark terror on Yairo's face. He saw Jiro's desperate, helpless expression. He saw Kaminari, usually so full of loud, idiotic confidence, pale and shaking. 13's words from minutes before echoed in his mind. Your powers are not meant to inflict harm. They are meant to save people. It wasn't a tactical problem anymore. It was a moral one. His classmates were in danger. They needed to be saved. The thought was so simple, so pure, that it cut through years of his father's complex, brutal conditioning. For the first time, his motivation wasn't to win, to dominate, or to prove his strength. It was to protect. He changed course, abandoning his pursuit of Bakugo. He moved with a new kind of purpose, using his ice to create a silent, swift path along the cliff face, positioning himself directly above the wreckage zone. He needed to act, but he couldn't be reckless. He had to save Kaminari without getting him killed. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. He focused, not on overwhelming power, but on intricate, absolute control. He held out his hands, and from his palms he didn't unleash a wave or a blast. He wove. A massive, intricate wall of ice erupted from the cliffside below him. It wasn't a solid, brutal barrier like the ones he'd used in the battle trial. This was different. It was a complex lattice, a shield of interlocking, crystalline bars that grew with incredible speed, forming a protective cage around his classmates. It separated them from the villain in an instant, the bars too thick to break easily and too close together for the villain to reach through. The villain roared in frustration, slamming his fists against the ice, which held firm. Akira, however, paid a price for such fine control over such a large area. A wave of intense cold shot back up his arms, and he cried out as a deep, painful frostbite settled into his left shoulder. The skin turned a deathly white, and he could feel the chill spreading into his bones. He had consciously taken the injury, prioritized the safety of his classmates over his own well-being. It was a choice he had never made before. Down below, Bakugo, who had paused on his own climb to see what the commotion was, stared at the massive, elegant ice cage. He had seen Akira's power before, the overwhelming force, the destructive fury, but this was different. This was controlled. It was defensive. It was heroic. He looked from the ice cage up to where Akira was clutching his frostbitten shoulder, a flicker of something other than rivalry in his explosive gaze. Meanwhile, in the flood zone, the situation was just as dire. Shoto, Azuritsuyu, and Mineta had been warped into the water, surrounded by villains with aquatic quirks. This is bad, Ribbit, Tsuyu said, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Mineta's hysterical screaming. They have us surrounded, and they clearly have the advantage in this environment. Shoto's mind was racing. He was powerful, but he was outnumbered, and his fire was useless here. His ice could be effective, but the villains were fast and agile in the water. He needed a way to end this quickly. He thought of Yagi's words. You cannot continue to destroy your own body. He couldn't afford to shatter another limb, not when the main villains were still out there. He had to be smart. Tsuyu-san, he said, his voice steady. Can you carry Mineta-kun and me out of the water if I create a distraction? I can try, Ribbit, she replied. But what kind of distraction? Shoto looked at the villains closing in, their grins wide and predatory. He took a deep breath and slammed his right hand onto the surface of the water. He didn't try to freeze the entire zone. Instead, he focused his power, creating a rapidly expanding iceberg directly beneath the ship they were near. The villains, caught off guard, were either thrown from the water or trapped in the expanding ice. It bought them a precious few seconds. Now! Shoto commanded. Tsuyu's tongue shot out, wrapping around his and Mineta's waists, and she leaped towards the edge of the pool. They landed on solid ground just as the main event began in the central plaza. Aizawa, despite his incredible skill, was being overwhelmed. The man with the pale blue hair and the disembodied hands all over his body, Tamura Shigaraki, was monologuing, his voice a scratchy, petulant whine, but the real threat was the creature beside him. It was a monster, a hulking giant of dark purple muscle with its brain exposed, its eyes vacant and staring. A Nomu. Shigaraki ordered the Nomu to attack, and it moved with a speed that defied its size. It caught Aizawa, smashing his head into the concrete, breaking his arms as if they were twigs. From the edge of the flood zone, Shoto watched in horror. His teacher, one of the strongest people he knew, was being brutally, methodically dismantled. Shigaraki then turned his attention to Tsuyu, who was still near the water's edge. "You're so cool, Eraserhead," Shigaraki rasped, his eyes manic. He started to walk towards them, his hand outstretched. "Let's see what happens when your student crumbles to dust before your eyes." He was going to kill her. His quirk, decay, would disintegrate her on contact. Shoto's mind went white with a protective fury. There was no time for a plan. No time for strategy. There was only time to act. A hero saves people. He couldn't use a massive ice attack. He might hit Tsuyu. He couldn't get close enough to fight hand to hand. He had only one option. A reckless, desperate, powerful option. He took a stance. The memory of All Might's form burned into his mind. He poured more power into his body than he ever had before, a raw, untamed 15% of one for all. Green lightning, far more intense and wild than in the quirk test, erupted around his entire body. His muscles screamed in protest. He pulled back his fist, not aiming at Shigaraki, but at the water's surface in front of him. Detroit. Smash! The punch didn't connect with anything solid, but the air pressure it generated was like a physical explosion. The entire surface of the flood zone detonated. A colossal wave, a man-made tsunami, erupted from the point of impact. It wasn't an attack of ice or fire. It was pure, unadulterated kinetic force. The wall of water slammed into the plaza, blasting Shigaraki and the League of Villains back, away from Tsuyu and the grievously injured Aizawa. The force was so great it sent the smaller villains flying. The recoil, however, was devastating. The untamed power ripped through Shoto's arm. He cried out, a sound of pure agony, as he felt the bones in his forearm and shoulder shatter, the limb rendered into a useless, broken mess. He collapsed to one knee, panting, cradling his ruined arm, the green lightning sputtering and dying out. Shigaraki picked himself up, scratching his neck furiously. "What was that? That wasn't on the schedule. Who is that brat?" He turned his manic gaze on Shoto, who was now being helped by Tsuyu and Mineta. The Nomu, unaffected by the blast of water, stood impassively. "Nomu!" Shigaraki hissed. "Kill him! Kill the flashy brat first." The Nomu turned its vacant eyes towards Shoto. It crouched, ready to launch itself across the plaza to finish the job. Shoto's heart seized with terror. He was defenseless. His arm was broken, his body spent. This was it. Boom! The main doors to the USJ were blasted off their hinges, sent flying inwards as if hit by a missile. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, and he was not smiling. "Have no fear." All Might's voice boomed, but it was different. It was devoid of its usual cheer. It was low, guttural, and filled with a terrifying, righteous fury. "Because I am here." He moved in a blur, scooping up Aizawa, Shoto, Tsuyu, and Mineta, and depositing them safely near the entrance where the other students were beginning to regroup. He did it so fast he was barely more than a flicker of red, white, and blue. He turned to face the villains, his eyes locked on the Nomu. His gaze flickered for a fraction of a second to Shoto, who was clutching his shattered arm. A look passed between them, a flash of immense pride, but also deep concern. "You did good, my boy. But we will talk about this recklessness later." Akira, having made his way down from the landslide zone with Bakugo and Kirishima, arrived just in time to see it all. He saw the broken state of his brother, the strange look that passed between him and All Might, and the Nomu that was now facing off against the number one hero. He stood beside Kirishima, clutching his own frostbitten shoulder, his mind a maelstrom of confusion. The power his inferior brother had just displayed was on another level entirely. It was a force of nature, a power that could rival All Might himself. And the cost was just as immense. He looked at Shoto's broken arm, then at his own aching shoulder. One injury was sustained to protect others. The other was the price of a godlike power he didn't understand. As All Might charged forward to meet the Nomu in a clash that shook the very foundations of the USJ, Akira Todoroki was no longer just confused. He was utterly, profoundly bewildered. The world as he knew it had been turned upside down, and at the center of it all was his quiet, defiant twin brother, who held the power of a god and the heart of a true hero.